10 long years had passed since Natalia disappeared. 10 years of pain, uncertainty, and endless nights filled with unanswered questions. The Olvera family lived under a constant shadow of despair, tirelessly searching for the daughter who had been taken from their lives when she was only 15. Every lead faded away, every promising clue ended in nothing. But just when the last ray of hope seemed to be extinguished, they received the call that would change everything. It was a gray, rainy morning. The sounds of the city seemed muffled by the weight of the storm that had been pouring down since dawn. Carla, Natalia's mother, was in the kitchen, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Sadness had left an indelible mark on her face. The wrinkles around her eyes revealed years of tears and sleepless nights. There wasn't a single day that she didn't think about her missing daughter, and the guilt consumed her inside. What more could she have done to find her? Had she failed as a mother? Tomas, her husband, was sitting in the living room, looking at the newspaper without really reading it. For a long time, he had held on to hope, but as the years passed, optimism gave way to resignation. The silence between them had become commonplace, like another presence in the house. They loved each other, but Natalia's disappearance had left a void so deep it was hard to fill. Suddenly, the phone rang, breaking the stillness of the morning. Carla jumped up, startled, and answered. On the other end of the line, a serious yet unfamiliar voice spoke. "Mrs. Olvera?" The voice asked. "I'm from the police department. I believe we have information about your daughter, Natalia." Carla's heart stopped for a second. After so many years, hearing that name in a context other than despair or grief seemed almost surreal. Trembling, she nodded, even though she knew the person on the other end couldn't see her. "Yes, what? What information do you have?" she asked, her voice faltering. "We have found a young woman matching Natalia's description. She's in the hospital. She's been a victim of a human trafficking network and has been held against her will for years. We need you to come as soon as possible to confirm her identity." The phone almost slipped from Carla's hands. The words human trafficking echoed in her mind like a distant sound she couldn't fully process. The idea that her daughter had gone through something so atrocious left her breathless. We're on our way," she managed to say, barely able to speak. She hung up and turned toward Tomas, who was watching her from the kitchen doorway. There was no need for Carla to say anything. Tomas already knew from the look on her face. Without a word, they hurried out of the house. The drive to the hospital was a mixture of hope, fear, and a surreal feeling that weighed on their chests. What if it wasn't Natalia? What if, after all, this was just another false hope? When they arrived at the hospital, a police officer was waiting for them at the entrance. He led them to a private room where a doctor and a nurse were waiting. The tension in the air was palpable. Carla clung to Tomas's arm, fearing what she was about to see. "Mr. and Mrs. Olvera," the doctor said, with a serious but compassionate tone, "the young woman we found has been through an extremely traumatic experience. She is physically weak and emotionally fragile. We've kept her under observation, but it's essential for you to identify her to confirm her identity." With a gesture, the doctor pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. Carla felt her legs might give way, but she knew she had to face what lay behind that door. Tomas took her hand, and together they walked toward the destiny that had eluded them for so long. Upon entering the room, they saw a young woman sitting on a bed, looking out the window. Her hair, though tangled, was long and dark, just as they remembered. But her face was marked by suffering. The eyes, those eyes that Carla knew so well, were empty, as if everything that had once been Natalia had been torn from her inside. Carla felt her world crumble around her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Tears began to roll down her cheeks uncontrollably. Tomas, beside her, squeezed her hand harder, but even he couldn't hold back the tears filling his own eyes. "Natalia!" Carla whispered, her voice broken, afraid that the young woman in front of them wasn't really their daughter. The young woman slowly turned her head, and her eyes met Carla's. It was only a second, but in that moment, something changed. Natalia blinked, as if something inside her had suddenly awakened. "Mom!" Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile, but strong enough to break the silence that had filled the room. Carla's choked sob echoed in the room as she ran to the bed and embraced her daughter. It was her! After everything, it was her! Tomas came forward as well, wrapping both of them in his arms. The three stayed there, embraced, as the weight of 10 years of despair and searching finally lifted. But the Natalia they had found was not the same girl who had disappeared. The doctor, standing by the door, watched with a mixture of relief and concern. He knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult. Natalia had been found, yes, but the true battle was just beginning. And as the Olvera family reunited after so much time, one question lingered in the air: what secrets and shadows from the past had Natalia brought with her? What horrors had she lived through, and how would they affect the life she once knew? The reunion was only the beginning of a new struggle, one that would test not only Natalia's strength but also that of her entire family. Despite the reunion, Natalia's empty gaze revealed that the deep scars of her past still haunted her. What dark secrets lay hidden in her silence? The reunion with Natalia had been a moment of relief for Carla and Tomas, but as the days passed, the reality of their daughter's trauma began to reveal itself. It wasn't just the physical fragility that Natalia showed, but the deep emptiness in her eyes and the silence she kept about what she had endured during those 10 years. The scars weren't only visible on her skin but also on her soul. The family had brought her back home, a home that now felt strangely different with Natalia's return. For years, her room had remained untouched, a sanctuary of happy memories, but now, seeing it occupied again, Carla felt a knot in her stomach. It was as if Natalia were there yet far away, trapped in a reality even they couldn't reach. "Sweetheart, would you like more to eat?" Carla asked in a gentle but concerned voice as she placed a bowl of soup in front of her daughter. Natalia, sitting at the table, barely nodded in response. Her gaze remained lost, fixed on an invisible point in the dining room. She hadn't eaten much since her return, and each time Carla tried to get her to talk, she received little more than monosyllables or uncomfortable silences. Tomas, sitting across from them, watched the scene with a feeling of helplessness. He wanted to say something, to do something to reconnect with his daughter, but every time he tried, he felt overwhelmed by failure. Natalia was not the same girl who had disappeared 10 years ago. She was a woman marked by indescribable pain. "Natalia, do you remember this place?" Tomas asked with a hopeful tone, trying to break the barrier between them. "Your mother kept your room as it was all these years. We always hoped that one day you would come back." The silence from Natalia was deafening. There was no blink, no gesture indicating she was listening. Carla put down the spoon with a soft clink against the bowl and looked at Tomas, exchanging a look that said everything they couldn't put into words. That night, Carla sat at the foot of Natalia's bed as she slept. Her breathing was deep but restless, as if reliving the horrors she had experienced in her dreams. Carla couldn't bear to see her daughter like this, but she didn't know how to help her. How does a mother face the abyss that has opened between her and her daughter? How can she fill the void left by 10 years of suffering and terror? The next morning, as Carla prepared breakfast, she heard a strange sound. It was a muffled moan, a murmur coming from the hallway. With a racing heart, she left what she was doing and rushed to Natalia's room. When she opened the door, she found Natalia sitting on the floor, curled up in a corner, trembling with fear. Carla felt a chill run through her body, seeing her daughter so fragile, so broken. "Natalia, sweetheart," Carla approached slowly, afraid of scaring her even more. "I'm here, my love. You don't have to be afraid. I'm with you." Natalia slowly lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with tears and confusion. For a moment, Carla saw a glimmer of recognition in her face, but it quickly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure terror. She couldn't stop trembling. "What did they do to you, my love?" Carla whispered, her heart breaking. She knew her daughter had suffered, but seeing her in this state shattered her soul. Natalia had once been a girl full of life, with dreams and hopes, and now only a shadow of that girl remained. Carla couldn't stop thinking about the horrors her daughter must have endured. How could they begin to heal these wounds? Would it even be possible? As the days went by, Natalia began to speak a bit more, but her words were fragmented, as if she were afraid to say too much. She avoided questions about what had happened during her disappearance, and each time someone mentioned it, she would change the subject or retreat to her room. Carla and Tomas tried to give her space, but they knew that sooner or later, they would have to confront the truth, painful as it was. One afternoon, as Carla was cleaning the living room, she heard a soft sound coming from Natalia's room. It was her daughter's voice, whispering. Carla approached the slightly open door and listened carefully. "No, I can't," Natalia was saying, her voice trembling. "I can't go back. They'll find me." Carla felt a shiver down her spine. Who was she talking about? Who was Natalia afraid of? She entered the room and saw her daughter sitting on the bed, eyes closed, as if reliving a terrifying memory. "Natalia," Carla whispered, approaching carefully, "you're safe here." No one is going to hurt you. But Natalia shook her head, clutching the sheets so tightly her knuckles turned white. They'll never stop, Mom, she whispered. They'll always be looking for me, always. Carla felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't fully understand what her daughter was saying, but she knew there was something far darker behind those words. Natalia hadn't just been a victim of human trafficking, she also seemed terrified of something or someone that was still haunting her. That night, Carla and Tomas sat in the living room, in silence, trying to process everything that was happening. Tomas, arms crossed and brow furrowed, finally broke the silence. We can't keep going like this, Carla. Natalia needs help, more help than we can give her. Carla nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She knew he was right, but the thought of her daughter needing specialized treatment, or even protection, was terrifying. You're right, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But what if there's more? What if Natalia is in danger even now? Tomas didn't respond immediately. He looked down the hallway leading to his daughter's room and sighed. If that's true, then we'll do whatever it takes to protect her, he said finally, with determination in his voice. The days that followed were a mix of worry and mystery. Natalia continued avoiding talking about her past, but her fragmented words and increasingly erratic behavior only deepened her parents' doubts. Something or someone was haunting her, and it wasn't just a memory. The reunion had brought relief, but it had also unleashed new questions, darker and more terrifying than Carla and Tomas could have imagined. As the shadow of that danger loomed over them, the Olvera family prepared to face a new battle, protecting Natalia from the ghosts of her past that continued to haunt her. Natalia begins to reveal dark fragments of her past, leaving her parents wondering if the danger still pursues her. Can they protect her before it's too late? The days grew shorter, and the shadows longer in the Olvera household. Despite Carla and Tomas's efforts to create a sense of normalcy, Natalia's presence seemed to bring with it a darkness they couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the visible fear in their daughter's eyes or her withdrawn behavior, there was something else, something intangible that lingered in the air, as if the ghosts of the lost years were present in every corner. Carla watched Natalia as she sat in the living room, staring out the window, her gaze fixed on some invisible point on the horizon. She always seemed to be somewhere else, trapped in a memory she couldn't escape. Although they were physically together, Carla felt the emotional distance between them remained vast. Natalia, do you want to go for a walk? Carla asked one afternoon, trying to break the silence. Natalia didn't respond immediately. Her fingers played absently with the edge of her sweater, and when she finally looked up, her eyes reflected deep fear. I can't, Mom, she said in a whisper. I don't feel safe out there. Carla felt a pain in her chest at those words. Her daughter, the same girl who used to run through fields and explore without fear, now couldn't even imagine stepping outside. She knelt in front of her, desperately seeking to connect with her daughter. Natalia, you're safe here. We're here to protect you. No one is going to hurt you, Carla said gently but with a firmness she hoped would convey security. But Natalia just shook her head, as if her mother's words couldn't break through the wall of terror that enveloped her. They'll find me, Mom. It doesn't matter where I am. They told me they would always find me. Those words chilled Carla's blood. She felt a knot in her stomach hearing her daughter say that. Who were they? What kind of threats had Natalia received while she was missing? Tomas, who had been listening from the kitchen, entered the living room, his face reflecting the same concern Carla felt. Who will find you, sweetheart? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. What do you mean? Natalia lowered her gaze, avoiding their eyes. The palpable fear on her face intensified, and her voice, when she spoke again, was barely a murmur. The people who had me. They told me that if I tried to escape or if I ever went back home, they would come for me. They said that no matter where I was, they would always know how to find me. Carla and Tomas exchanged horrified looks. The fear Natalia carried wasn't just a result of years of captivity but of a latent threat that still hung over her like a sword of Damocles. Natalia, no one is going to find you here, Tomas said, with a firmness that tried to mask his own fear. We'll make sure you're safe. We won't let anyone or anything hurt you again. But Carla could see that words of comfort weren't enough. Natalia lived in a constant state of alert, as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. Every sudden noise startled her, and there were nights when she locked herself in her room, afraid to come out. One of those nights, Carla went to see her. Natalia was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, her eyes filled with tears she didn't dare let fall. Natalia, Carla whispered, sitting down next to her. "Talk to me, sweetheart. Let me help you." "You can't help me, Mom," Natalia said, her voice trembling. "No one can. What I went through, what they did to me." She stopped, biting her lip to hold back a sob. "They won't leave me alone, not even now." Carla felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She had never seen her daughter so vulnerable, so broken. She wanted to do everything possible to protect her, but she also knew that Natalia needed to face her trauma to begin healing. "Natalia, you don't have to face this alone," Carla said, taking her daughter's hand in hers. "We're here for you. Whatever you need, whatever you have to say, we're here to listen." Natalia took a deep breath, as if trying to gather the strength to speak. Finally, she broke the silence. "There were other girls, where they kept me," she said, her voice full of pain. "They tried to escape too. Some managed, but others weren't so lucky. And they told me that if I tried the same thing, they would kill me. They'd kill anyone who helped me." Natalia's words hung in the air, filled with despair. Carla closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears threatening to fall. She knew her daughter had been through hell, but hearing those details was like reliving that suffering alongside her. "But you escaped," Carla finally said, her voice breaking. "You're strong, Natalia. You survived all of that, and now you're here with us. We won't let anyone hurt you again." "You don't understand," Natalia whispered, trembling. "They'll come for me, Mom. They always do." That phrase echoed in Carla's mind even after Natalia had fallen asleep. The fear her daughter felt wasn't irrational, it had been conditioned by years of abuse and terror. But how justified was that fear? Were they really in danger, or were Natalia's emotional scars keeping her imprisoned? The next morning, Carla and Tomas made a decision. They knew they needed outside help. They couldn't protect Natalia with words of comfort alone. They needed professional intervention and, perhaps, even physical protection. "I'm going to talk to the police, Tomas," Carla said, her voice determined. "If someone is looking for her, we need to make sure they can't find her." Tomas nodded, though his face showed a mix of concern and resignation. "We know that whatever is going on with Natalia is serious," Tomas said as he looked at his daughter from a distance. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together. We won't let her fall back into the shadows she just escaped from." As the secrets of Natalia's past begin to come to light, Carla and Tomas face a terrifying reality. The danger might be much closer than they thought. The first light of day had just begun to illuminate the horizon when Carla headed to the police station. Fear for Natalia's safety accompanied her every step, making her feel as if a shadow were following her. Despite spending a near-sleepless night watching her daughter's restless sleep, she was determined to do whatever it took to protect her. Tomas had stayed home, worried about leaving Natalia alone, and had insisted Carla not go to the station alone, but she'd been firm. She knew this was a step she had to take on her own. Upon arriving, Carla was greeted by Commissioner Morales, a man with a serious expression and tired eyes, who had spent years handling the region's darkest cases. He listened silently as Carla recounted Natalia's story, her fears, and the network of traffickers that, according to her daughter, were still searching for her. "Commissioner, I don't know what to do," Carla said, her voice trembling slightly. "My daughter hasn't been the same since we found her. She's terrified. She believes they're going to find her and take her back. She says they're always looking for her, always." The commissioner nodded, leaning his elbows on his desk, visibly affected by Carla's words. He had heard similar stories before, of young women who had been kidnapped and forced to live in inhumane conditions. The emotional and psychological trauma they carried was deep, often irreparable. But this story had an even darker edge. "Mrs. Olvera, what your daughter has endured is a hell that few people could survive," Morales said, his voice grave. "I understand your concern, and you're right to be worried. These types of human trafficking networks are dangerous and don't usually leave loose ends. If Natalia escaped, and if they truly believe she knows something that could threaten their operation, it's likely they are looking for her." Carla felt her stomach sink. She had known something terrible was looming over them, but hearing the commissioner confirm Natalia's fears made everything much more real. "Is there anything we can do?" Carla asked, almost in a whisper, feeling fear begin to consume her. Morales leaned back in his chair and sighed. "The first step is to ensure Natalia's safety. We can assign surveillance to your house, but that could draw attention if they're watching. My suggestion for now is to keep a low profile. Don't do anything unusual. Try not to follow predictable routines. If someone is watching you, the last thing we want is to give them a chance to act." Carla nodded slowly, trying to process what the commissioner was saying. The thought of having to hide in her own life felt almost unbearable, but she knew it was necessary to keep Natalia safe. "Do you think they might try to take her again?" she asked, dreading the answer. Morales paused before answering. "I can't rule it out. These people," he stopped, choosing his words carefully. "They're very organized, very dangerous. If they believe Natalia is a threat to them, they'll do whatever it takes to eliminate that threat. What we need to do is ensure they can't get close to her. We need time to investigate and see if anyone is watching." Carla felt pressure in her chest, as if the weight of everything that had happened was about to crush her. But she couldn't afford to break down. Her daughter depended on her. "What should I do while you investigate?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Keep your daughter close. Don't leave her alone. If you notice anything unusual, anything at all, call us immediately. And most importantly, talk to her. Make her feel safe. If Natalia believes she's alone in this, her fear could consume her. She needs to know you support her, that you'll be by her side no matter what." Carla nodded, feeling somewhat reassured knowing that the commissioner was taking the situation seriously. As she returned home, she couldn't stop thinking about Morales's words. The idea that someone might be watching their home, observing their every move, sent chills down her spine. But she had no choice. Her priority was Natalia. Upon arriving home, she found Tomas sitting in the living room, his face filled with worry. "How did it go?" he asked, standing up to embrace her. "They're going to help us, but it won't be easy," Carla said, resting her head on her husband's chest. "The commissioner believes they might be following us. We have to be careful, keep Natalia safe, and avoid drawing attention." Tomas nodded, but his expression turned even graver. "Carla, something happened while you were out." Carla's heart skipped a beat. She pulled away from Tomas and looked at him urgently. "What happened?" she asked, feeling fear invade her once again. Natalia received a call. It was an unknown number. She didn't want to answer, but when it rang a second time, she picked up. When she answered, she didn't say anything at first, but then I saw her face turn pale. I heard a noise from the kitchen, and when I got there, she was trembling, holding the phone in her hand. Tomas paused, swallowing before continuing. "Someone told her they knew where she was. That if she didn't come back to them, they would come for us." Carla felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The reality of the threat was much closer than she had imagined. She ran to Natalia's room, finding her curled up on the bed, her eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart," Carla knelt beside the bed, taking Natalia's hand. "What did they say to you?" "They know where I am, Mom," Natalia whispered, her voice broken by fear. "They said they'd come for me if I don't go back." Carla closed her eyes, trying to remain calm despite the panic she felt inside. She knew the situation was escalating quickly, and they would have to act before it was too late. As the threats become more explicit, Carla and Tomas realize that the danger is closer than they ever imagined. The fight to protect Natalia has just begun, but the network that kept her captive may be ready to take more drastic measures. The sun had barely reached its highest point in the sky when Carla and Tomas began to devise a plan. They were in the kitchen, speaking in whispers while Natalia rested in her room. After the terrifying call she had received that morning, they both knew they could no longer just wait. The threat was real, and time was working against them. "We can't stay here much longer," said Carla, looking out the window as if expecting to see someone watching from the street at any moment. "If they know where we are, it's only a matter of time before they do something." Tomas nodded, though his expression showed a mix of concern and frustration. "I know, but we can't just flee without a plan. If we leave now, where will we go? And more importantly, how will we know we're truly safe?" Carla crossed her arms over her chest, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She couldn't afford to make impulsive decisions, but every second they spent in that house increased the risk that something terrible might happen. She knew Tomas was right. They needed a solid plan, something that would give them an advantage over those pursuing them. "We need to talk to Commissioner Morales again," Carla finally said. "He offered us surveillance. Maybe we can accept his help now, or even suggest that he help us leave town safely." Tomas frowned. "Leave town?" he repeated. And what if that's what they want? If we move, they could find it easier to attack us on the road. At least here we have some protection. What if their plan is to lure us out of our safe zone? Carla sighed, feeling despair begin to well up inside her. I don't know, Tomas. But I can't bear the thought of staying here, sitting around as if we're just waiting for something horrible to happen. They've already shown that they can reach us. If they keep calling Natalia, they might try something worse. We have to do something before it's too late. Tomas moved closer to Carla, placing a hand on her shoulder. His eyes were filled with worry, but also with determination. We will, he said softly. We're going to protect Natalia, no matter what it takes. I won't let them hurt her again. As they talked, they didn't realize Natalia was standing at the doorway, listening silently. Her eyes, usually filled with fear and confusion, now held a quiet determination. She knew her parents were willing to do anything to protect her, but what they didn't know was that she was also ready to act. Hours later, Carla called Commissioner Morales and arranged an urgent meeting at the police station. Tomas insisted that Natalia stay home, but she refused firmly. I don't want to be alone, she said with a strong voice. If something is going to happen, I'd rather be with you. Her parents exchanged a worried look but finally agreed. They knew Natalia was scared, and the simple fact of being separated from them could worsen her emotional state. So, together, they headed to the police station. When they arrived, Commissioner Morales met them immediately, noting the gravity of the situation on their faces. He offered them a private place in his office to talk without interruptions. Tell me exactly what's happened since we last spoke, Morales said, taking a seat across from them. Carla recounted the call Natalia had received, every word, every threat. Morales listened with a frown, clearly concerned about the escalation of the situation. This is not a good sign, said the commissioner, rubbing his chin as he thought. If they're contacting Natalia directly, it means they not only know where she is but are prepared to act. We can't underestimate them. Tomas, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward in his seat. What do you suggest we do, Commissioner? We can't keep living in this fear. We need to ensure Natalia is safe. Morales nodded. The first thing we need to do is make sure you're under surveillance. We can't allow them to keep threatening her this way. We'll implement discreet surveillance around your house and movements. We need time to investigate who is behind these calls and, most importantly, how to stop them. Natalia, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. I don't think we have time to wait, Commissioner, she said, her voice trembling but determined. They've found me once already. If they decide to come for me again, they will, and it doesn't matter if we have police outside the house. I don't want my parents to suffer because of me. I don't want anyone else to get hurt. Carla looked at her, her eyes filling with tears, understanding the pain and guilt Natalia carried with her. Her daughter had endured the unimaginable, and now she felt like a burden to her family. Natalia, you're not responsible for any of this, Carla said, moving closer to hold her daughter's hand. We're here to protect you, and we're going to do that. Morales intervened again. Natalia, I understand your concern, but you need to trust us. Our priority is your safety. I'll increase the surveillance and mobilize my men to investigate any suspicious activity near your house. But we also need you to continue your lives as normally as possible. We can't make you appear vulnerable. If we show fear, they'll exploit it. Silence settled over the room as everyone processed the commissioner's words. The tension was palpable, and although there was a plan in place, no one could deny the real danger lurking around them. Finally, Tomas spoke up. Commissioner, we'll do whatever it takes. But if something feels wrong, if we sense the danger is too close, we'll leave. I won't risk my daughter's life. Morales nodded solemnly. That's the right call. Stay alert and contact me if anything comes up. As the family got up to leave, the commissioner watched them with a look of concern. He knew the situation wasn't going to improve anytime soon, and time was working against them. The traffickers were ruthless, and if they had truly decided that Natalia was a threat, they would stop at nothing to eliminate her. As Carla and Tomas do everything in their power to protect Natalia, the trafficking network seems to always stay one step ahead. The threats grow stronger, and the danger draws ever closer. Will surveillance be enough to protect them, or is the enemy already nearer than they realize? Darkness had fallen over the town, wrapping everything in an unsettling shroud of silence. The family was gathered in the living room, with the television on at a low volume, But no one was paying attention to what was on the screen. Natalia sat on the couch, clutching a pillow tightly, while her parents, Carla and Tomas, exchanged silent glances from opposite sides of the room. They knew something was about to happen, but the silence only deepened their uncertainty. Since the conversation with Commissioner Morales, they had intensified the security measures at the house. The discreet surveillance the commissioner had promised was in place, but it did little to reassure them. Natalia couldn't stop thinking about the threatening call she'd received. She knew those men wouldn't stop, that there was nothing she could do to keep them away. Sometimes, it felt as if shadows were following her, and every dark corner of the house reminded her that she wasn't safe. Carla broke the silence. "Are you all right, Natalia?" she asked softly, with the tone of a mother desperate to protect her daughter but knowing she had no control over what was happening. Natalia looked up, trying to smile, but her expression reflected exhaustion and worry. "I don't know, Mom. I feel like they're here, close to us. I feel that no matter what we do, they'll always be watching me." Tomas, who had been standing by the window, looking outside, turned to join the conversation. "We're not going to let them hurt you, Natalia," he said firmly. "Commissioner Morales has put his best team on the house. Northwest One can get close without us knowing. We're protected." But despite Tomas's conviction, his words didn't calm Natalia's fears. She knew those men were cunning, that they always found ways to get past security. For years, they had kept her captive, watching her every move, not allowing her even a moment of freedom. Now, even though she was back with her family, she still felt like a prisoner, just in a different place. They won't stop, Dad," Natalia finally said, her voice breaking. "They found me once. They can do it again." Carla quickly approached her daughter and embraced her tightly. Desperation was etched on her face, but she said nothing. She just wanted Natalia to feel that she was there, that she wasn't alone. Tomas clenched his fists, trying to contain his frustration. He knew words weren't enough to soothe his daughter's fears, and deep down, he shared that fear. "What we have to do is be smart," Tomas said, finally breaking the silence in the room. "We can't play their game. If we show weakness, they'll take advantage. But if we stay calm, if we go on with our lives as usual, they'll have Northwest way of getting close without us noticing." Natalia nodded slowly, but doubt continued to grow within her. Since her return, she had tried to regain some sense of normalcy, but everything felt so distant, so unreachable. True freedom hadn't yet come for her. How could she feel free knowing that those men still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? Suddenly, the phone rang, breaking the fragile calm of the scene. Carla and Tomas exchanged a look of alarm as Natalia tensed up on the couch. The sound of the phone, which once had been a mundane noise, now echoed through the house like a threat. Tomas was the first to react, rushing to the phone and picking it up with trembling hands. "Hello?" he said, trying to keep his voice calm. For a moment, there was an eerie silence on the other end. Then, the sound of heavy breathing came through, followed by a dark, disturbing laugh. Tomas felt a chill run down his spine. "I know where you are," a man's mocking voice said. "No matter how many police you have watching, you won't escape me." Tomas felt the phone slip from his hands. The threat was clear, and the sense of security he had tried to convey to his family shattered in an instant. He hung up without responding, his eyes full of worry as he looked at Carla and Natalia. "What happened?" Carla asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tomas shook his head, unable to find the words. The room was enveloped in heavy silence as the night shadows grew longer. They knew they were in danger. The threat was not only real but drawing closer. "We have to leave," Tomas finally said, breaking the silence with renewed determination. "We can't keep waiting. We're no longer safe in this house." Carla nodded, though fear was etched on her face. She knew the decision was difficult, but she also knew Tomas was right. If the men who had once taken Natalia had managed to track them down here, there was no place where they could hide. They had to move, and quickly. "Pack the essentials," Tomas said. "We're leaving right now." As Natalia went upstairs to gather her belongings, her mind was full of questions. Where would they go? Would they be safe anywhere else? How much longer could she keep running before they found her again? Fear gripped her, but she knew she had no choice. She had to move forward, for her family, for herself. Carla helped her pack, both working in silence as the clock ticked. In less than an hour, they were ready to leave the house. Tomas had called Commissioner Morales to inform him of their decision, and although the commissioner had tried to persuade them to stay under protection, he understood the fear driving them to flee. When they finally stepped out the front door, the night's cold air wrapped around them. Tomas looked around, making sure no one was watching. The streetlights shone dimly, and the silence was almost eerie. Carla and Natalia got into the car while Tomas loaded the last bags into the trunk. But just as he closed the trunk, a noise from the nearby bushes made Tomas stop. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Had they been found? Suddenly, a pair of headlights turned on at the end of the street, illuminating Tomas and exposing his fear. The enemy was closer than they'd thought. The family has decided to flee, but danger lurks around every corner. Will they escape in time, or is it already too late to avoid the threat that's chasing them? The car sped along the deserted highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness of the night. Natalia, seated in the back seat, kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching as trees and shadows blurred past them, leaving behind a house that had been both her refuge and her prison. Carla, sitting in the front passenger seat, had her hands tightly clasped in her lap, while Tomas, at the wheel, kept his eyes focused on the road, his lips pressed in a tense line. None of them spoke. The silence inside the car was thick, heavy with fear and the urgency of escape. They knew they didn't have much time before the men who had pursued Natalia found them. The memory of the car headlights appearing at the end of their street burned in their minds. Who were they? Were they following them? With his foot firmly on the accelerator, Tomas tried to stay calm, but inside, fear was consuming him. He had spent years searching for his daughter, years enduring the pain of not knowing where she was or if she was even alive, and now, after finally getting her back, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her again. He couldn't let those men take her once more. How much longer? Carla asked, breaking the silence with a trembling voice. Another 30 minutes, and we'll be at the place Morales told us about, Tomas replied, without taking his eyes off the road. He said we'd have protection there, that they would keep us safe until things settled down. Carla nodded, but the worry didn't leave her face. She knew that no matter where they went, those men would follow. They had resources, contacts, and wouldn't give up easily. If they'd been able to keep Natalia captive for so many years without anyone finding them, what would stop them from tracking them down now? Natalia, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened before they fled. The fear she'd felt hearing the threatening voice on the other end of the phone haunted her like a shadow. There was no rest for her, not even in the car, in the middle of the darkness. Even though she was with her parents, she felt as if danger was lurking around every corner, in every whisper of the wind. Suddenly, Tomas slammed on the brakes. Carla grabbed the dashboard in surprise, while Natalia clutched her seat. The car came to a stop in the middle of the road, illuminated only by the front lights cutting through the gloom. "What's wrong?" Carla asked, alarmed. "A car," Tomas muttered, pointing ahead. A few meters away, a vehicle was parked in the middle of the road, blocking their path. Its headlights were off, and its silent presence on the road was as eerie as it was threatening. Natalia's heart began to race, panic rising in her throat. She knew this was no coincidence. "It's them," Natalia said, her voice trembling. Tomas frowned, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. "We need to turn around," Carla said, turning to look at her husband. "We can't stay here." But before they could react, the headlights of the car in front of them suddenly turned on, momentarily blinding them. The road, which had seemed empty and deserted moments before, was now bathed in a cold, white light. Tomas tried to maneuver the car, turning the wheel to make a U-turn, but just then, another car appeared behind them, blocking their escape route. "They have us trapped," Carla whispered, feeling fear take hold of her. "We're not giving up," Tomas responded firmly, though the tension on his face was evident. The doors of the cars opened, and several dark figures began to step out, moving towards them with a disturbing calm. Natalia shut her eyes tightly, her heart pounding in her ears. She could feel terror taking over, the sensation of being back in those men's grip. The shadows of her past were back, and this time, they wouldn't stop until they had her. "What do we do, Tomas?" Carla asked, her eyes filled with desperation. "We stay in the car," Tomas replied, not taking his eyes off the men approaching. "We're not going to let them take Natalia. Not this time." One of the men, who seemed to be in charge, approached close enough for his face to be visible under the beam of the headlights. He was an older man with a hardened, scarred face. He smiled, a cold, empty smile, and gently tapped the driver's window with his knuckles. "You know why we're here," the man said, his tone relaxed but full of menace. "Hand over the girl, and no one will get hurt." Tomas didn't answer. Instead, he gripped the steering wheel more tightly as his mind raced to find a way out. He couldn't fight them, they were at a disadvantage. But he couldn't hand over his daughter, either. "Don't worry, it'll be quick," the man continued, moving a little closer to the window. "We only want the girl. You can go on with your lives. Everything will go back to normal." "No!" Natalia shouted from the back seat, unable to contain herself. The man turned his head, his cold, calculating gaze meeting Natalia's eyes through the glass. "Ah, Natalia," he said with a smile. "You know you can't escape us. We've been following you ever since you left. There's nowhere in the world where you can hide from us." Tomas knew there was no time for negotiating or waiting. They were cornered. With a swift motion, he turned on the engine and quickly spun the wheel, heading straight for the car blocking the road. He pressed down on the accelerator, willing to do whatever it took to escape. The car surged forward, and the men in front barely had time to react. The sound of metal colliding with metal filled the air as Tomas's car rammed into the vehicle blocking their path. Tires screeched, and the car jolted violently, but they managed to break through. "Hold on!" Tomas shouted as the car sped forward, leaving the men and their cars behind. Natalia's heart was still racing, but there was a spark of hope in her chest. They knew they weren't safe yet, but they had managed to escape the trap. The danger hadn't passed, but they were together, and for the first time in a long time, Natalia felt they might have a chance. Although they barely escaped, the enemy still lurks in the shadows. How much longer can they keep running before the past catches up with them? The car finally stopped at the edge of a small hill, where the sun was beginning to rise slowly over the horizon. After hours of fleeing and tension, the first light of day offered them a glimmer of hope. Natalia, exhausted but relieved, leaned back against the car seat, letting the warm dawn light bathe her face. Tomas turned off the engine and remained silent for a moment. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as his breathing gradually steadied. The echo of the chase still lingered in his mind, but for now, they were safe. Carla, sitting beside him, let out a deep sigh, as though all the weight of the past few days had just lifted from her shoulders. "We made it," Carla murmured, breaking the silence. Tomas nodded, but he said nothing. Despite having escaped the ambush, the worry was still etched on his face. He knew that the danger hadn't completely disappeared, but they had reached the place Morales had promised as safe. It was a small town in the mountains, far from the main routes and out of reach of the men pursuing them. Natalia got out of the car slowly, her feet still a bit unsteady. She felt as though the ground beneath her shoes was different, as if each step she took in this new territory brought her closer to the freedom she had longed for. As she walked toward the edge of the hill, gazing at the vast landscape stretching out before her, an unexpected peace began to fill her heart. For the past 10 years, Natalia had dreamed of the day she could walk freely, without fear, without the invisible chains that had bound her for so long. She had lived as a prisoner, captive not only to those who had kept her as a slave but also to her own fears and the painful memories that haunted her. Now, the fresh morning air felt like a reminder that she was alive, that she had survived. Tomas and Carla followed, watching silently as Natalia stepped away a bit to breathe, to try to process everything that had happened. They knew the road to healing would be long and difficult, but for the first time in many years, they had hoped that their family could be whole again. "What are you thinking?" Carla asked softly, approaching Natalia. Natalia didn't respond immediately. She took a moment to choose her words carefully. She looked at her adoptive mother, who had fought so hard to find her, and then at her father, who stood a few steps behind with the same look of worry and love she had always seen in him. "I think I'm finally free," Natalia said, with a mix of relief and sadness in her voice. "You are," Tomas nodded, also approaching. "But I know it won't be easy. What you've been through. No one should have had to endure that. But now, you have the chance to start over. We're here for you, always." Natalia looked at them, feeling the sincerity in their words. She knew her family was broken, that time and pain had left deep scars on all of them. But she also knew that now, more than ever, they wanted to support her. However, there was something inside her that remained a mystery, something she hadn't yet shared. "There's something I haven't told you," Natalia confessed, lowering her gaze to the ground. Carla frowned in concern. "What is it, dear?" Natalia sighed, feeling a knot in her throat. During her captivity, she had discovered things she couldn't ignore, things that could put her family in danger if they didn't face them together. When I was with them, I wasn't just a prisoner. I found out things. Secrets about the people behind the network. And I know they won't stop until they find me. They know I know too much." Natalia's words fell like a stone in the air. Carla brought a hand to her mouth, horrified by what her daughter had just revealed. Tomas, for his part, immediately tensed up. He knew that the human trafficking network wasn't just a group of criminals, it was a powerful organization with resources that could reach any corner of the country. "That means," Tomas began to say, but Natalia interrupted him. "It means that, even though we escaped this time, I'm not truly free. I won't be until they're stopped." Carla shook her head, not wanting to accept what she was hearing. "You can't go back to that world, Natalia. We can't allow you to risk yourself again." "I don't want to risk myself," Natalia replied firmly. "But I also don't want to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. If we want to be truly free, we have to face them. We have to find a way to stop them." Tomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. He knew Natalia was right, but he also knew that confronting that organization could cost them more than they were prepared to pay. Still, after everything they had been through, they couldn't let fear rule them. "If that's your decision, we'll support you," Tomas finally said, his voice resolute. "But we'll do it the right way. We'll talk to Morales and the authorities. If these men are as powerful as you say, we can't face them alone." Natalia nodded, knowing there was no other option. She couldn't keep running forever, but she also couldn't confront them without help. Together, as a family, they would find a way to face them, to ensure no one else would suffer what she had suffered. A gentle wind blew, rustling the leaves of the trees surrounding them. In the distance, the sound of a small river filled the air with a serenity that contrasted with everything they had lived through. For the first time in years, Natalia felt that there was a future, a life beyond the pain. "Thank you for never giving up," Natalia murmured, looking at her parents with gratitude. Carla and Tomas embraced her, an embrace that meant more than words could express. They didn't know what the future held, but they would face it together. They were no longer the same people who had begun this search 10 years ago. They had changed, but they had survived. And for Natalia, that was the greatest victory. A few months later, in a cafe across the city, Natalia was talking with a man she had met during her recovery process. Andres, a patient and understanding man, had helped her see life from a new perspective. Over time, their friendship had grown into something deeper. As they laughed together, Natalia knew that, although the road to healing would be long, she was finally ready to form a new family, a life free from the ghosts of the past. The past always leaves scars, but freedom and love are what heal those wounds.